Welcome to Sideline Sanity with me, Michele Tafoya, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Go to legacypminvestments.com. Legacypminvestments.com. Coming up, if I told you that one of the reasons I left a really amazing job in sportscasting was China, would you believe me?
For nearly 3 decades, she's reported the action from the sidelines. She started very young. She's covered the NBA, NFL, Olympics, and the college football and basketball national championships. And now, during these insane times in our world, Michele Tafoya thinks we need a serious dose of sanity. This is Sideline Sanity with your host, one of the sanest people on planet Earth, Michele Tafoya.
All right, glad you joined us on Sideline Sanity today. Yes, I teased you there by saying one of the reasons I left my job. For those of you that don't know, I was the sideline reporter on Sunday Night Football for many, many years. And before that, Monday Night Football. And before that, the NBA on ABC and many other things. The Olympics, swimming, college sports. I did a lot over 3 decades in sports television. And for many years, after 9/11 especially, I started thinking, there's got to be something I can do to help. Help what? Anything. The world felt like it was falling apart around me, and I happen to love my country very much and appreciate what it's done for my family, my ancestors, and me, and what I want it to be for my kids. And so I got myself to the position where I finally said, you know what, I'm gonna leave this amazing job. And everyone shook their head at me and thought I was crazy. And yes, I left voluntarily. For those of you who still think that this was by NBC's design, it was not. It was my design. And I just teased you by saying, if I told you one of the reasons was China, would you believe me? Well, it's true. When I say that I saw things falling apart around me, one of the things that I think is, heck, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think one of the biggest dangers to the United States of America is China. Why sugarcoat that? Why sugarcoat that? So I love this country. I still think it's the greatest experiment on earth, warts and all, bad history and all that we're still trying to reconcile. It's a place everyone in the world wants to be. It's a place everyone in the world wants to be and continues to try to get to. Why? Because we have laws, because everyone is equal under the law. And although there are cases of unfairness everywhere, this is still the last great hope on earth. Where else would you go to have as much freedom and liberty as you have here in the United States of America? I contend, and I'll debate anyone on this. Where else? Where else? So one of the reasons that I love this country is I was really taught a lot of history by my dad and my mom when I was growing up. And we, in 1976, which was the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence, we traveled across the country and went to Washington, D.C. And the documents, the Constitution, the Declaration, were on display. And we got to go see them. And it's a very faint memory in my mind looking at those documents. And I certainly didn't appreciate them then at a young age the way that I do now. But the Declaration of Independence is a thing of brilliance for a lot of reasons. And we'll just start with the word independence. Now, that document that declaration not only said, you know what, the colonies are breaking free from King George III and that monarchy. We also want each citizen here to have independence in these states. Now, again, we've got the big caveat, right? The big stain of slavery. So that for a long time, slaves did not have that independence and they did not have that freedom. We can talk about that till we're blue in the face. We continue to talk about that. We continue to acknowledge it. It's no secret. It's not a part of history anyone is trying to hide. But let's work from the idea, which is what Frederick Douglass said we always should do, is work from the idea that individuals could have independence in the United States. Frederick Douglass knew it was just a matter of time before slavery was abolished and that all people would have independence and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, in other words, the Declaration said not only are we not going to rely on the king and be dependent on the king, our government will be run by our citizens, not by any one person. It is a citizen-run government. Yes, there are legislators, there is a Supreme Court, there's a president, but we elect those people. They're not born into it. They're not, they are elected by us. We get to choose who we want in those offices to represent us and select the Supreme Court and on and on. And this gets lost a lot today. And I'm not sure why, although the cynic in me believes that we just don't teach history properly. I think we just don't teach history properly and within the framework of the ideas behind it. These days we're too hung up on, well, yeah, but George Washington owned slaves. Yes, he did. As did much of the world's population, not just the United States, the world's population back during those times. Okay. But George Washington was also a man for the time, a man who led this country to revolution. And so we can say both things can be true. And both things are true. What's also gotten lost is this notion that the government, we elect them, they represent us, and they give us the freedoms that we're born with. In other words, they don't grant us freedoms. That's not theirs to grant. We were born into freedom. These are inalienable rights, right? So why is it that people want to rely on government? Why do they? I think because it's easier. Because then you don't have to take responsibility for certain things in your life, like earning an income or teaching your kids or paying for your food. Maybe it's easier. I think ultimately it's a whole hell of a lot harder. The second question is, why does government want the citizens to rely on it? We have conservatives and we have liberals and progressives and staunch conservatives, people that would be maybe called the alt-right. So we've got the extremes, right? We've got this whole spectrum of politicians, but there is a good chunk of them that really want you to rely on government. They want it. They want you to need them. Now, why? We'll get to it. And why did we become so dependent on other countries, specifically China, which is what I started with, for so many of our goods? Why, and why? So here's a definition of liberty that's been presented to me that I think is important. Liberty exists when individuals, you, me, individuals, endowed with unalienable rights and protected by the rule of law, have the ability to make their own choices in pursuit of a life that they value. I know it's long, but think about it. Liberty exists when individuals, when each individual person, because they're endowed with unalienable rights and protected by the rule of law, which is what our legislators are supposed to put together, have the ability to make their own choices in pursuit of a life that they value. So some guys like to make microchips. Some people like to be fashion models and actors. Some people like to have podcasts. Some people like to play football. Some people want to teach. Some people want to preach. Some people want to study. We all decide what our values are and what we want to do and be. And we have the ability to pursue those because we're protected by laws that say, yes, as long as you don't speed and you don't kill anyone and you don't rob, you can go about your business. And because we have unalienable rights, I don't know why I have such a hard time saying that, unalienable rights, like the right to defend ourselves, the right to pursue happiness, the right to be alive. So that's what liberty is all about. But the government has made it kind of easier to live without working. And in the process, they've taken the dignity, the pride, and the joy out of work. There is great dignity in work. A young person said to me recently, "Oh my gosh, can you imagine being a telemarketer? What a loser." And I went through the roof because there is dignity in all work. When you are working independently by choice, even though it's not your favorite job, even though it may be a stepping stone, even though it may be an internship, no matter what it is. I started with a paper route. That wasn't all that fun, but I did it because I wanted to earn my own way. I didn't want to depend on anyone for anything because I wanted to be independent. And I feel that way still. And I feel as though the government, the more they give, the more people want from them. And the less value they place in their own hands, their own work, their own ethic, their own pursuits. The government will take care of that. I can just sit here and watch TV. The government can take care of that. I'm not going to pay attention to what's going on in my kid's school. Yeah, leave it to the government. So if you want a life that you value, you should be less dependent on the government. Yes, they supply the rules by which we live, but they should not give you stuff. They should not give you stuff. So why do they want to give you so much? Why do they want to give and give and give and give and make it sound like your life is just going to be a piece of cake and they'll take care of everything? I'll tell you what I think about that next. Well, speaking of the government giving and giving and giving, it also taketh away when it taxes you. And a lot of what goes on with monetary policy impacts inflation and the rest. And since November of last year, the stock market has plummeted due to some of this. But gold has been on the rise. This is the good news. Gas prices are insane. The stock market is extremely volatile. Inflation is worse than it's been in 40 years. We have a war between Russia and Ukraine that's disrupting a lot of things, and the markets don't like instability. But the good news is you have options. Gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold for protection because gold provides a hedge against inflation and it protects against a weakening dollar. Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust for investing in gold and silver. You need an investment that's going to protect your wealth and retirement. So you should call Legacy Precious Metals and you should do it today. You want to be proactive while the window is still open because remember 2008? Those who invested in gold saw huge gains while others, they lost their retirements. Legacy Precious Metals can advise you on all of your options for investing in gold and silver. There is no reason not to call. You can speak to an IRA expert at Legacy Precious Metals. Here's the number, 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. All right, so I asked you, why is it that many politicians want to just give you stuff? They want to just give and give and give. Well, they understand, many of them, that the more that people depend on them, the more power they have. Think about other power structures, like if you're a parent, your kids depend on you, right? So what do? You say, take out the trash or you don't get your allowance. They depend on you. So you have the power over them. Or your dog, sit or you don't get a treat. The dog depends on you for its food, for its water, for its walk. All of these structures, look, there's a power hierarchy at most jobs, right? My producer would say, you're not getting any airtime if your stories aren't good. Oh, I better make my stories good. All right? These are just kind of samples. But politicians understand that the more people depend on them, the more power they have. It's pretty simple. A dependent voter is a dependable voter. Hey, yeah, I voted for this guy because he keeps giving me stuff. So I'm going to keep voting for him. Teachers unions. Let's keep voting for these guys because, they'll make sure we get more money to give our union bosses. Yeah. Well, a dependent America will vote for politicians who give them the stuff and say, hey, we can give you this stuff because we're going to make the rich pay their fair share and they'll pay for it. Don't you worry about a thing. The rich will pay for it. It's something that they try to pass off as compassion. But I have to ask, what is compassion? What's compassionate about taking away your freedom of choice? How is that compassion? What is compassionate about taking away your freedom of choice? Like they say, it's compassionate to provide all of this stuff, but you have to come to us for it. They like to tout things like healthcare and welfare, but it's all on their terms. If you want this stuff, you have to vote for them and do what they say and fill out all the forms and go through all the red tape and maybe wait 6 months to get your check and all of that. So you've lost some freedoms there. Whereas if you just had taken control of the situation yourself, you probably would have gotten through it much more easily and without feeling indebted or owing to anyone or beholden to anyone or dependent on anyone. I don't think there's anything compassionate about giving and giving and giving until you become dependent on someone. That is not compassionate. That's why for me and my family, my husband and I, we are trying to raise independent kids who know that they won't be able to rely on us forever. It's hard. Sometimes it hurts, but it's for their best. It's for the kids' best interest, not ours. And that's what we're trying to do. All right, so now let's talk about China. This is where I started and this is where I'm going. So China manufactures things very, very cheaply for the rest of the world, right? And if companies can get things made cheaper in China, they'll do business with China. Why? Because their profit margins grow. So if I'm a person that's selling, I don't want to do anything wrong here, but if I'm a person that's selling this bowl right here, oh, this is a great bowl, and I made it myself, and it cost me $8 to make it, so I think I'll sell it for 12 or 16 bucks. But what if they make them in China and they can make them for 8 cents and I still sell them for 16 bucks? Holy mackerel. My profit margin just about doubled. Sweet. I'm going to do that. But then China decides they're going to make the bowls for you, but they might not be exactly what you want, but they're going to be cheaper. And if you do keep making these profits and profits and profits, then you're going to go, I am sticking with this plan. China, you got all my business. In fact, now I'm going to make plates and cups and dishes, and you can make them all, and I'm going to make a fortune. Yay. Now, who do you depend on? You depend on China to make that stuff for you. That would be okay if China wasn't run by the CCP, who wanted to be the most dominant power on earth and was hostile towards America. It might be okay if that weren't the case, but that is the case. And if you don't think China is hostile and wants to become the world power and take over the universe, you've been under a rock, or you haven't been paying attention, or you just don't care. That would not be a pretty life if that were to happen, by the way. So China makes things cheaper, your profits grow, but when they want to get their hooks in and control everything, which they do, what happens? They now control the shipping, they control the production, and they control the health of these goods. In effect, they can weaponize their dominance of these things. And when it comes to pharmaceuticals, which we rely on China in a big, big way, that's dangerous. They could withhold supply. They could raise costs. So then now we don't get to set the price. We just have to pay whatever they want. They could make those antibiotics or other drugs, medications dangerous. They're already producing all the fentanyl that comes in here and is poisoning people and killing people in this country. So what's to say that they might not throw something into the painkillers or make painkillers a certain, aspirin or not aspirin, acetaminophen, Tylenol, ibuprofen, make it addictive. Throw a little something in there to make it addictive or make the antibiotics less effective. That's what we call, in a way, chemical warfare. Okay. So I know you think I'm a nut now. because I've thrown out all these hypotheticals. I don't think I'm a nut. Back in a second, and I'll tell you why. All right, can't recommend it enough. Uncle Tom 2, the film that unveils the Marxist agenda pushing anger and discontent to overshadow Blacks' identity with the Christian and American culture that made them successful. Pre-order Uncle Tom 2 today on salemnow.com. Go to salemnow.com. Do it today. All right. So you think I'm a nut job for proposing all these ideas that China wants to kill us all and take over the universe. I suggest to you that you read a little bit more of the news, and I'd suggest, and I know it's hard to know whom to trust. I usually turn to the Wall Street Journal because most of their reporting is very sound. It doesn't take a lot to see this. And if you think that I'm a conspiracy theorist and that this is all just a bunch of scare tactics, no. What I'm trying to impart is that I really do believe that China and the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is a hostile entity. First of all, clue number one, they commit genocide. The Muslim Uyghurs there are slaves, or worse, killed on a daily basis. That is a fact. And because of the slave labor in China, how do you think they make everything so cheaply? How do you think they can make this bowl for 8 cents? Because they don't have to pay their labor. Or they manipulate. So those things are facts. So if I sound like an alarmist, how about this? Terrorists are going to fly our own jet planes into the Twin Towers and then into the Pentagon and maybe even the White House or the Capitol. Do you remember that day? And if you're too young, please go study this. It doesn't take long for it to wake you up and remind you that until that moment, we could never have imagined that happening. In fact, it seems to me that in the wake of 9/11, the government got together with Hollywood producers and said, think of anything, the most outlandish thing you can think of that we might need to prepare for. Because this was nuts. COVID-19, that's another thing that, again, we still don't know for certain where that came from, but I think the Wuhan lab is a mighty fine place to start looking. But gee, we can't do that. I wonder why. All right, so what can you do? What can you do? Even if you think this is a little bit of alarmist, or maybe you think, God, this is dumb. I know I get that plate really cheap over at the store. I'm not going to mention any stores because it's made in China. I like cheap plates, but I like freedom better, and I don't want to get hurt by the Chinese. What can you do? As Ennis Cantor Freedom and I talked about, look at your labels. I cannot tell you how many things are made in China, and you'll discover it. You start going to the store, read labels on clothing, on medication, on knickknacks, $16 bowls, whatever. Start reading the labels, and you will see, wow. And yes, and you might even say, this is too hard. There's just too much stuff I rely on from over. Now, do you really rely on it? Do you really? Like, you really don't need this bowl, right? I mean, and believe me, if you do a little bit of research, you can find stuff made elsewhere. In fact, I post it all the time on my Twitter page at Michele_Tafoya, on my Instagram, on my Facebook. I post stuff a lot about where you can buy alternatives. You can also get involved a little bit. Think about who you vote for, whom you vote for, and where they stand on this. You can call your representatives, your legislators. Here's another thing you should probably do. You should probably delete your TikTok app if you have it. And if you want to learn more about that, we have a podcast from a couple weeks ago about TikTok. Look it up and listen to that and get your eyes wide open. It's really nice to think that the entire world is a nice, safe place with no enemies, but that's just not reality. It's also really nice not to have to think about it and so to just say, "Oh, ignorance is bliss. I don't care where my stuff comes from." I know a lot of people like that, and that's fine. But if you do care, then keep caring. And I will leave it at that. And by the way, let me remind you that there's nothing anti-Chinese people in this. It's the CCP. It's the Chinese Communist Party. It's the Chinese Communist Party that okays the slavery and genocide of Muslim Uyghurs and others on their soil. And you know, if you've been paying attention, how they're trying to intimidate us, how they don't feel we're very strong over here anymore. Each individual can be strong. We don't need to depend on them. And in fact, depending on China is the last thing we want to do. We should depend on ourselves. We should depend on us. So that's all I got for you today. Thanks for being here for Sideline Sanity. I'm Michele Tafoya. Be brave, do good, and look at your labels. Well, we always appreciate it when Charles Thorngren can join the podcast and talk a little money and gold in particular with us. Gold and silver. And Charles, these are mad times. I mean, it's just really wacky. And anyone who's watching the stock market is probably asking themselves, what do I do? I don't know, I don't know how to ride this roller coaster with everyone. And so obviously you recommend investing in precious metals. What's the first step that someone should take in learning about what precious metals can do for them?
The first step, give us a call, right? We're going to show you what options they're available. That's what Legacy is about, is showing you options and educating everyone. The important thing to know is that we don't invest in gold and silver because it's pretty or because it's unique. Those things are true, but we do it because it has the history of being the true diversity for someone's portfolio. It's the insurance policy against everyone's retirement and their savings. So this is why we look at gold and silver specifically. It's the currency that was always meant to be, right? It is not a fiat currency. There's no inflationary effect on it. Gold and silver are going to be worth what they're worth. The thing that changes with everything is the amount of dollars it takes to buy that gold and silver and the amount of dollars you get for owning that gold and silver. That's the big key. And this is what people don't understand about it typically, is that it is not the stock market and it is not the dollar. It's an investment that is counter to both of those. So it gives you true diversity and balance, is what everyone's looking for right now. They just don't know it. As inflation gets higher, this is where gold and silver come in.
Someone is saying, okay, I want to do this, but I want to choose one or the other. When they call you and ask you these questions, when would you recommend gold and when would you recommend silver?
That's a great question. And what a lot of people wind up doing is actually doing a little of both, because that's possible, right? But it's going to depend on your specific investment parameters. And that's one of the things we're going to do, that we're different from your typical stockbroker, because we're not going to say, this is what all my customers are doing, because that's not what's important. What's important is what matters to you and your portfolio. When is your retirement coming up? What are you looking to accomplish, right? What are your risks? What are your safety features that you need? So there's a lot that goes into it. And what we do here is talk with you, right? Our big thing is to educate you so that you understand why you're doing it, as well as in what form and fashion, because that's important.
It is important. And I think too that people probably think, I'm a small investor. This is not for me. I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to do this at a level that will benefit me. To them, you would say what?
I don't think you can afford not to. If you have money saved and you're not flush with cash, it's more important than ever for you to make sure that you put yourself in a protective situation, right? You have less to lose, so you should not lose it. It's really It's not about how much money you have or don't have. It's about how much protection you need. And if you don't have a very large portfolio, then you probably need it more than the guy who does, because you can't afford that loss. And look at what the market's done over the course of the year. We are talking about a situation where the loss is extravagant and it's not done yet. This is why we look at precious metals to counter that.
And lastly, Charles, for those who fear that a recession may already be here or is coming, what do you tell them about how in a recession this investment helps out?
Great question. Couple answers there. We are in a recession, but the reality is it's not going to get bad for a few more months. Then it's really going to be bad. What we see happen next year is going to be devastating. Just think 2007, 2008, right? The troubles with 2008 happened in 2007. It just took time for it to hit the market in a real sense. And this is what we see. We have inflationary numbers that rival the 80s. That's something that's going to be dramatic. So when we look at this, we say, why do we want to do it? And that's exactly why. It helps because it's not the dollar and it's not the stock market, right? This is the safe haven investment. And if you look at long-term wisdom, that's what metals do. They give you a place to store your wealth without the effects of inflation, right? Inflation is good for your metals. The stock market correcting is good for your metals. A weak economy is better for your metals. So that's what it's meant to do. And that's why it has its place in the economy. We're talking about a worst case scenario right now, but even under the best of terms, the government tells you 2 to 3% inflation is a good thing. And at 2 or 3%, it doesn't sound bad, right? But over the course of your retirement and your lifetime investing, if you go 40 years, you've lost over 120% of value of your dollar by not having metals. So even in the best of times, there should be some in your portfolio. And during the worst, you really want to make sure you get a hold of somebody who can explain why and show you what options you have.
Yeah, that's why we love to recommend Legacy Precious Metals on our show, Sideline Sanity. So the website is legacypminvestments.com, legacypminvestments.com. You can also go to the website and find the phone number to call, learn a whole lot more. It's just worth asking some questions, right? A quick phone call and getting more information about everyone's specific situation.
Absolutely. We're a no pressure organization. Everyone who contacts us, they reach out to us. We share information. If it's right for you, great. If it's not, that's great too. Learning something never hurt anybody.
No, that is true. And we're glad we had you on to learn something from you today, Charles Thorngren. Again, it's legacypminvestments.com. Please go check them out. Just ask some questions, learn a little something. Thank you so much, Charles.
My pleasure. Thank you.